Well, there was a guy on the ground in B-52 that needed to be picked up and taken to the hospital. So I start this non-precision approach. You looked at your instruments, you couldn't see through nothing but fog. And I hit minimums, the lowest you're supposed to go. But I knew I didn't have enough gas to go anywhere else because I was there trying to pick up this guy that needed us. So I dropped it another 100 feet. Then I was just really nervous. Co-pilot looked at me, and there's hills out there. And then I heard the tower call. He says, "You're cleared to land." And I turned toward where the runway was, and I was below the runway. Okay, I'm Buddy Herrington. I'm a Southern boy. I was born in Dothan, Alabama. Dothan is, "Come, let us go to Dothan." That's in Genesis, so it's biblical. The hospital I was born in burned down, so it was hard to get a birth certificate again when I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. Anyway, born in Dothan, Alabama, and moved to Ashford, Alabama, a little bitty town. My dad was a building contractor, and he was always moving from place to place building houses. We lived there for a little less than a year, and at age 1, I moved to Donaldsonville, Georgia, which is in the southwest corner of Georgia. A little burg, maybe 3,000 people. That included everybody in the graveyard. We moved there, and that's when I took my first steps. My father built houses, and he built a lot of houses in Donaldsonville, but then pretty soon he's building them in Cairo, Georgia. Not Cairo, but Cairo, Georgia. So by the time I was 16, I was the son of an old man. I loved him very, very dearly, so he just went out on his own and started building houses and built just beautiful houses. I've always been somewhat jealous of him because his point is, says, "Son, I built that." And I can say some of that now too, because I came here and built a church. I say, I helped build that. My mother had not graduated from high school, but she was respected in the community. We lived out between two farms. It's a farm community. One farm was called Little Hope, and one was called Seldom Rest. So for our house, we thought we had Seldom Hope and Little Rest. And at the end of kindergarten, they had a graduation ceremony. I was a valedictorian. So I still remember on stage, friends, parents, teacher, and gave my little speech. Went to Donaldsonville Elementary. It was a nice enough school considering it's southern Georgia. Schools weren't paid a lot. Then we had... There's no middle school. High school began with 8th grade through the 12th. My sister was 5 years older than me, and so I had to follow my sister for every grade. And she was good. So she became valedictorian of high school. Well, I had to beat her at everything. She was also president of the Tri-High-Y, which was a Christian organization that met at school. So I became president of the High-Y, the men's version of in this case, the high school boys version of that. And so everything that she did, I tried to beat. She played saxophone, first chair in the band. I played cornet. I was the first chair in the band. And I became valedictorian. And so I was wondering, now, what do I do for a speech? And then I asked her what she did. So I told everybody what I was doing. This is the speech my sister gave. And I gave that speech. In high school, I realized that I was busy a lot of things, especially in South Georgia. Church was at the center of everything. I was just Sunday morning you're in church, Sunday evening you're in church, Wednesday would be prayer meeting, and then if anything went on, the society knew it was at church. Luckily, in Donaldsonville, the churches all got along together. The Methodist church was at one corner, the Presbyterian church in another corner. 2 blocks down was the Baptist church, and across the tracks was the Nazarene church, and we all got along together. So every 5th Sunday night, we will all have worship together at one of the churches. And I thought that was a great experience. I was interested in sports and things like, but we didn't have no transportation to get me to there, so I couldn't do very many sports. So in late of the game, 7th grade or 8th grade, I started playing piano. The piano teacher had gone through Juilliard. She was excellent. After a while, she dropped all of her students except for me. So I was going to do music. We were approaching end of high school. I was a good student, valedictorian. I knew that Vietnam was going hot and heavy. We couldn't afford to send me to college. But Carl Sanders was the governor of Georgia, and he saw all the good students in Georgia hightailing it out of Georgia. No good jobs, no. So he gave the better students in Georgia a chance to go to 6 weeks of college. She was going.
Yeah.
And then she dropped all her students except for me because she thought I was good. But then she also told me at the same time that, hey, don't make music your job. You love music, keep it as your hobby, and you can get paid to do something and still love music. But if you do it as your job, you may lose your love of it. I kind of resented that first, but I found she was absolutely right. She knew what she was talking about. So I was taking music from her, and then she fell and broke her hip. Went to the hospital for quite a number of weeks, so I lost my music teacher. But the governor of Georgia had saw all these students leaving, says, I'm going to give you some free school. So I went for 6 weeks free school. It was great. Wesleyan College was in Macon, Georgia, and it was a woman's college, but they didn't have school during the summer. So here's all these smart students all running around. You could take anything you wanted. I could have gone in academics, but I went in music. So I was dating the girls in the chorus and in the band and just having a good time at school. We did archery, we did philosophy, we did all kind of stuff that I had not done in my little town. We did the 1812 Overture, and we had at a huge auditorium, and the cannon was a garbage can with a pistol in it. It was great stuff. One night we were sitting there in the room with my roommate, and I was just, going through my music stuff. It was okay. He was doing push-ups on the floor, and he had a math text under his nose, and he was pushing up, doing really, really hard. And I said, why are you doing that? I mean, you see, I'm having a good time. He says, well, I want to go to the Air Force Academy. I'm going, oh, what's that? I didn't know. He says, well, it's like West Point, but you can go fly airplanes. And I came out of my seat, fly airplanes? How do you get in? So I found out you had to have a congressional appointment. I didn't necessarily know anybody, but I knew people in town. My dad had been president of the Lions Club, had bought uniforms for the band and other stuff like that. We were well known, but again, I was not a farmer. It was a farm community. I didn't have the FFA jacket, Future Farmers of America jacket with blue corduroy and the corn on the back. I didn't have that, but I was still president of everything I joined. And so I went to one of the congressmen that one of the farmers knew, and he had been in there for a long time. Went to the other farmer that he knew, one who was running for Congress. And the guy says, well, I don't know any of the people that are wanting to go. I can have 2 appointments at the academy at one time. That's all. Says, I've got 1 opening. Whoever makes the highest on the tests goes. Well, in the high school, you couldn't be in the band and play sports. So I wanted to be in the band. I'm in the band. So I was going against another guy when we went to Moody Air Force Base. There was quite a number of us, and you had to take a physical test. And I watched this guy that was trying to date the same girl I was dating. And if he did 7 pull-ups, I did 8. If he jumped 6 feet, I jumped 6 feet 1 inch. Whatever he did, I was going to beat him. Well, in beating him, I beat everybody else too. So I already had the academics, valedictorian, had the physical, and did that. The guy gave me the appointment. So that was the only time I'd really met him was when he gave me the appointment. So I got to fly out to the Air Force Academy. I'd never flown in an airplane before, and I was going to want to go fly as a career. Along the way in church, I was president of the Methodist Church, Methodist Fellowship for the youth, MYF, Methodist Youth Fellowship. Then I became president of the sub-district, which is the southwest corner of Georgia, Sowika. And then I became president of the Thomasville district for, the territory expanded. And then I was going to I would have been president of the South Georgia Conference. But then that's when I got my chance to go to the Wesleyan College. So I turned that down and went to Wesleyan College. Kind of glad I did. So I fly out to the Air Force Academy.
Boy, that must have been exciting.
And you go in and here's all these people yelling at you, screaming, everything else like that. And you just got to you go through a line, and there was doctors on each side, some with guns and some with needles, and you're getting vaccinated, everything at once. I mean, your arms were sore. You also, this is when it was just guys at the academy. You also had to try out for the choir. And there was a hymnal there, and others were doing like that. And I looked at him. I said, I don't want that. I'll do an Amazing Grace. I sang 4 bars, and the choir director says, "You're in." He was a great guy. At the time I was going to the academy, then you had to go through basic training, which is like going into basic training for other things, but somewhat harder in many ways.
In what way do you mean that?
It was physically demanding of all kind of things. You had to be in good shape. You were in a competition with people who were, I remember the first day we got there, we were all in the auditorium. It says, well, how many people were valedictorians? I'm going, yeah. I stand up, I look around me, and everybody's standing up. Then they say, well, who was head of their football team? Big crowd stands up and other things like that. The competition was stiff. It's sort of like when you go into a war scenario, look to the left and right, those people may not be around anymore. But I made it through. It was all right.
How were your drill instructors? You got stories about them?
Yeah. Well, first day, the band took over. The enlisted band guys took care of us, and I had heard that it was just going to be rough. It's going to be really terrible. And so they're helping us march. We got our uniforms. We're marching into Mitchell Hall. Mitchell Hall is about an acre of area with no internal supports. And the food was great. I'm going, this is not hard at all. But that was only for day one. The next day, the band marched away, and the upperclassmen marched in. And the next thing, you had somebody right there in front of you spitting at you, just yelling and screaming. So I found out that's what it was going to be like. And I finally got back to my room, and I had 2 other classmates because there were so many of new cadets. We had to have 3 to a room. Well, one of my classmates, Larry Howell was his name, had gone to the prep school. He had not graduated from high school formally. He got his GED, and he was asked to take a test, and he had to take a test or else do KP, kitchen police. So he went to take a test, didn't know what it was for. It was to enter the prep school, and he passed. So he got there. And so we look at it, we were all 3 just stunned, and Larry says, I told you what it was going to be like. And in fact, that first night, one of the new guys tried to kill himself. We had M1s. We didn't have M1s. He had actually had a blank with it, had a sharpened pencil and rammed it down there and was going to shoot himself. And somebody stopped him. He was just sitting there. Because if you haven't had that, people screaming at you all the time, and then for the next month or so, people were screaming at you all the time. And you had to know all the requirements, stuff like that. When you marched into your meal, you'd have a table commandant. It would be one of the senior class, and then it went down to the lower rank, and we were the 4th class. We were the doolies, which means slave. And you would have to know who the officer of the day was, the cadet officer of the day was, and how many days till graduation of each class. Is that when it got to your class, you said there were an infinite number of days until we graduate. And you had to learn planes and everything else like that. And if you didn't do that, you didn't eat. Well, when you get hungry, you learn what you have to know. And it's just kind of weeding out and getting you ready to take on hard things.
The majority of everyone there wanted to fly, I would guess.
Many did, but some got there because if their parents, father or mother, had been killed in action or something like that, they could get an appointment, and they may not be qualified to fly. And in fact, I had 20/20 vision to get in. But when you're always reading these little notes and everything else like that. And then all the studying I had to do, my vision went down some, and I started wearing glasses. But Vietnam was hot and heavy, and I could go to pilot training even wearing glasses. And that's
Wow,
what
I would have never guessed that.
That's what I did. You need pilots. You need to, and I had already flown the T-41 there, and they knew I could fly, so I went to pilot training. Now I'm going to jump back to high school a little bit. High school, I studied history. I knew that the United States had never been at war over 4 years in a row. In fact, as for World War II, we were not actively in World War II over 4 years. And I was thinking, 4 years of college, Air Force Academy, a year of pilot training, that's 5 years, I am home free. And after 5 years, I wake up and I'm in Cam Ranh Bay and they're shooting at me.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Go back to, so you finish the basic, and then what? Then what happens?
Then you immediately go, well, actually, we took a zone of interior. We went around and saw bases all over the United States, which was very interesting because you got to see places like Wright-Patterson, where they did all kind of work on science and space and other stuff like that. We went out to Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico and watched fighters sweep across and everything else like that. We went to San Francisco, and we stayed right under the Golden Gate. It's a beautiful base there, and that's where we stayed. We enjoyed and you learned that, but I mean, you didn't have a break to go home or anything. So once you got there, starting in June, you didn't go home until Thanksgiving.
And at this point, what plane did you want to fly? Did you know?
I just wanted to fly. Give me an airplane. Teach me how to fly it. That's what I wanted to do, which is somewhat short-sighted, but that's what you are when you're young.
Yeah.
So I started, this was a change from West Point and others. You could then declare a major in school. So I just wanted to fly. So I declared a major in business administration, something like that. I said, maybe that'll help or something like that. Then I got into an economics course, and I just studied my butt off. I was used to getting A's. I got a B. I kissed off the second half of that course. Just says, I'll study something else. I got a B. Going, that doesn't make sense. I don't want to do that. Says, what else can I do? So I became one of 2 humanities majors. So I'll study whatever I want to study. Now, you had to get a Bachelor of Science, so you had to take geometry, astronomy, navigation, all the things you'd get, all the math that you would get as an engineer, and you had to pass that, which I could do. I was easy enough. But I wasn't interested in far career. I was interested in going to pilot training.
So how did you end up there? And what was that like? Was that there in Colorado, or did they send you somewhere else?
No. At the Academy, flew 2 T-41s. It's a little Cessna. And you got to fly. The cadet day was long. You'd get up 4 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't have a field at the Academy then. We'd go to Peterson Air Force Base, which was also the civilian field. Meet your instructor there, fly in the morning, and then go back and do academics in the afternoon, then do intramural sports, everything else like that, and then study until lights out, and then the next day you'd go do it again. You would take in 5,000 calories a day eating and burn it all up because you had to do this. The schedule was rigorous, very rigorous.
What did you think of the instructors on the plane?
Well, the instructors, they were great. They knew how to fly the plane. What I like about instructing, and what they probably like too, is you didn't have to do this motivational step. Hey, you need to study this, because if you don't study, you crash the plane and you possibly die. And you guys wanted to pass, so they tell you how to fly it, and you listen to them. You learn how to fly it.
First solo flight.
First solo life. I was wondering. Well, I've been doing all right with him in the seat. He got out of the seat. I still do all right. So there was no heartbeat or anything else like that. It was a matter of, I can do this.
Felt natural.
It felt good. I felt, if you're really going to be a good airplane driver, you need to feel at one with the plane. You aren't acting like you're just moving this to make the plane. You are moving you and the plane all at once. That's the way you fly a plane well. So I graduated from the academy, 4 years of hard instruction. But I mean, they had the idea of the whole man concept. You had to take law, you had to take ethics, you had to take all kinds of things. But the cadets always called it the manhole concept every once in a while. Cadets did have a sense of humor. I graduated. In fact, is something that you may want to brag about or not. Presidents usually come to give you graduation. So it was Tricky Dicky. So Richard
What year? 70?
1969.
69.
So President Nixon there. And I got to hand him credit because he got me out of Vietnam. We were in Vietnam for a long time and finally found out that, hey, this is just a dumb thing. President Nixon made the decision, we're going home. And we did go home. Now, when we were there in Vietnam, it was always you were going to go home in August. That was true, but you just didn't know what year. But he made a decision. He's the same one that recognized China. Here, we had recognized Taiwan. Here was this whole continent full of Chinese, and everybody was going, well, we just don't recognize them. That was pretty dumb. But Nixon was smart enough to do that. Then he got caught up in Watergate, so there's good and bad with a lot of things. But he had there, and Eisenhower's son was there, and Nixon's daughter Patricia was there, and they were kind of making googly eyes at each other. They eventually got married.
Okay, from the time you got there till you finished, how long were you there at the academy?
4 years.
4 years. So at this point, you're 22?
Yep.
Then what happened?
Graduated, went to pilot training at Moody Air Force Base. We had a month off between graduation from the academy and start of pilot training. Another guy and I took history class together. Says, well, let's go see Europe. So we started at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia, flew out of there, went to Dover. And there's a Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina, I think. And then we went to Dover, because there were no planes going over to Europe. So we sat around the officers' club pool, watched all the young girls swimming. Then he says, well, there's a plane headed over to Germany. He says, that's good. We hop on. They start taxiing out. They said, well, our flight has changed. We're going to Greece, going to Athens. And we said, that's Europe. Fine. We get off. We got off the plane in Athens, Greece. Now, the United States and Greece were not on good stuff. Huge Navy aircraft carrier with a huge carrier flag on it, a big American flag. And at night, they lit that up. So you had to walk carefully. We found out that the best way to get around was on a bicycle. We started biking around Athens and found 11 of our classmates already there. So we went from Greece. We were hoping to Athens to go somewhere else, but the planes kept coming through, but they had POL, petroleum and engines and stuff like that. So we decided, well, we'll just take a train trip. And so we get on a train. Now, this is brand new second lieutenants. Our uniforms were in a bag, hidden. And we were going through a communist country, Yugoslavia, on the train. And so it was easy enough to get on. We got on the train, we bought the tickets with drachma, and we going up, and we're going through Yugoslavia. It was a wood-burning train.
Wow.
Going through Yugoslavia, looking out the train windows, it looked like the 1920s or so. The tractors didn't have rubber tires. They had metal tires. They wore babushkas and other stuff like that. It really looked like Depression area things. The first night we were on the train, we were going there. The train stops. Well, the generator stopped. There's no electricity. You're sitting in the dark. And here comes a little trainman. He's got a hat on. It's got a red star, USSR, red star. And I'm going, and I only had Greek drachma, and he allowed us to buy the tickets there, and he took our passports away. And then I'm feeling really a little uncomfortable. But we had a chaplain from the Army with us. He was a lieutenant colonel. And he says, don't worry about it. You'll get it back in. So we go through Yugoslavia and figured, heck, they handed our passports back. We got off the train in Austria. So what do cadets do first thing? We go to the nearest bar. Somebody told me to take Kennedy $50 with me. So I had stacks of Kennedy $50. So we were sitting in the bar and we were sharing a beer or so. And there was one of the guys out there that came over and says, you're Americans, aren't you? So, how could you tell? His name was Heinz Rust. He was a banker. He says, well, it's obvious I could tell. And he says, where are you staying tonight? We don't know. He says, come to my house. So we go over to his house, and he has a bike. He doesn't have a car. We walk to his house, and his wife comes in, and she's dressed with this, it looked like Austrian Sound of Music thing, had a big pram baby and everything else, like beautiful. She didn't speak very much English. He spoke English quite well. He was a banker. So we had dinner there and everything else like that. He left in the morning. He says, don't worry about it. My wife will take care of whatever you need, gives us a big wink. And we were looking at each other. Really? She comes in and nice breakfast on china and crystals. We get out and we're going to hitchhike. We want to go to France. Nobody was picking us up. Finally, one of the trucks stopped. He says, I know that's where you want to go, but these trucks can't make it over the mountain. Those cars over there can't make it over the mountain. You have to get back on the train if you want to go there. So we hopped on the train. We happened to get in a car that had this cute girl that was sitting there laughing at us for nothing. And finally she found out that her father was Renault car factory.
Yeah.
She says, well, how are you going to get around Paris? Well, I don't know. She gave us maps to the metro and says, well, I'll meet you on Sunday and I'll bring my sister and we'll tour Notre Dame and then I'll show you a really old Catholic cathedral. And she was true to her word. We show up on Sunday. She shows up where she says, we go through Notre Dame and it's beautiful. It's often beautiful. And then she took us in the bowels of Paris back to one of the original Catholic churches there. And it was just nice touring there.
That sounds like a fun trip.
It was a fun trip. We wanted motorcycles, so we thought we'd go to Germany. We went through Germany. We ended up going to London, and he bought a 250cc motorcycle. I bought a 175, and then this tells you how old it was. We went into a youth hostel. And the lady says, you will take a bath. Here you have to pay for the bath and everything else like that. And then there goes the food. It was a cheap place to stay. We stayed around there for a while. And the first night out, we were leaving. We were going up to Mildenhall, English Air Force Base. You're driving on the wrong side of the road. And I'd never driven a motorcycle before. And I'm behind him because he's got much bigger than ours. And I went around the curve too fast and ended up in the right lane and the car's coming at me. And I think, I'm not ready to die, but I've got to take the ditch. I hit the ditch. Motorcycle flipped over. I flipped off the motorcycle. I landed on my back really hard. I thought, I'm going to die. And then I realized I'm okay. I had a motorcycle helmet. I had combat boots on. Dust was all over the place. The motorcycle was on its side, still running. I picked myself up, hopped on the cycle, caught up with him, and we had gone across the London Bridge, leaving London. Now, the time, you know where the London Bridge is now?
Yeah.
It is in Arizona. We crossed that on motorcycles. And then he wanted to go to, we both wanted to go to Amsterdam and go the rest of that. So we headed over to Amsterdam, and I had a bag tied to the back of my motorcycle. It was a rope tie. I didn't realize that the rope had hit the tire and burned, and all my things were gone. So we had stayed at Mildenhall Air Force Base. I came back and says, well, can we stay here again tonight? They says, yeah, we can do that. The friend I was with had a girl back in States, and he wanted to go home anyway. So we drove our motorcycles to London, shipped them slow freight to the States, and came back, and a C-130 was leaving Mildenhall, going to Goose Bay, Labrador. Well, all my clothes, my passports, my traveler's checks, everything, it was all gone. So we end up Goose Bay, Labrador, this is summertime. It was cold, but survived that. And then we got another C-130, and it landed in North Carolina. And then we went out and thumbed our ride. And finally, one of the semi-trailer trucks stopped. We thought he was stopping for us, but he had a mechanical problem. He fixed that, but he let us ride with him. He drove us all the way down to Cordele, Georgia. And I asked to borrow a dime, because this is when you had a dime to use the phone. And so I borrowed the dime, called my sister. I says, can you come get me? She says, you're in Europe. I says, no, I'm in Cordele, Georgia. I'm 40 miles away. Would you come get me? So I got home, and my dad and my uncle had never been out of Georgia, Alabama, Florida. So my dad had been to Mexico once. I says, well, let's go to Alaska. And I put them in a car, my dad's car, and we headed from Georgia to Alaska. My uncle was a one-legged guy. He had a wooden leg. He had gotten it chopped off a couple of times. So he's driving first. And he comes in Alabama. We have not left Alabama. He runs a four-way stop, and a semi-trailer truck was coming and just T-bones us. Boom! Breaks my father's ribs. We have to check. Got him in the hospital. Check to be sure that the car would still drive. And it was drivable. I mean, it had dents, but it was drivable. And the doctor says, well, you can sit home or you can sit in the back of the car. I took the wheel. And I drove from Alabama to Alaska and back. We would get on a road going that way. We'd have to change the road, and my dad and my uncle would panic. I said, well, the other road doesn't get us to Alaska. And then this was in July of 1969. We were sending a rocket, the Saturn, putting a man on the moon. Finally got to Alaska, and there was the Alcan Highway. And I had heard how rough the Alcan Highway would be. Bought a little book and gave mileposts along the way. So I started driving. First 20 miles, no problem. It was paved. And then the pavement ran out for the next 2,000 miles. You didn't have to worry about speeding, because if you went over 30 miles an hour, the suspension would just break. And then the only way you could pick up, it was AM, FM radio, but the only way you could pick up anything was on the AM radio, and you'd have to pull under power lines. And use that as an antenna. So that's how I was keeping up with us putting a man on the moon. So I heard the man on the moon sitting under power lines in Alaska. We went up there and went fishing and came back. And then when I got home, there was a little lady. I had stopped to ask the police for help finding my bags in England. I didn't know that you went to the post office with Lost and Found. And a lady had found my bags and said, I need an address. I wrote her, gave her a $20 bill and a 20-pound note, and she sent them to me.
Wow, that's wild.
So I got the stuff back. So then I had to go to pilot training. This will take a little bit. Went to pilot training. I'd already had my private license from the academy, and I went out the first day to go fly, and they said, "You're grounded." Oh, I was just seething. All my classmates going out to go fly. I says, "Well, why am I grounded?" He says, "Because you were knocked out when you took boxing." I said, "Yeah, I got hit one time, got knocked out." Says, "You're grounded. You got to go see the flight surgeon." Well, this was a Friday. In Valdosta, Georgia, there's about 175 churches there. Says, "Where's the biggest church?" I went to the Baptist church that day because I thought that's where the commander of the base was. And he came out, and this second lieutenant was jumping on this colonel, saying, "I came here to fly, and they won't." And he's, "Calm down, Lieutenant." He says, "Report to the hospital at 0700 tomorrow. I will be there." The flight surgeon was not happy to see me because that was earlier than he usually reported. But I had to go there, stand there, touch my nose and everything else like that. "You're fine." So I accomplished what I wanted. I flew. I was doing all right. You start off with a T-41 again. Then you go to T-37, we call the Screaming Mimi, because it turns JP4, the fuel, into noise. It was a noisy jet. It was not pressurized, so you had to deal with on your ears pressure, like that. But I flew it fine. Then I went to T-38. It's a Talon. It's got very short little wings and everything else like that, and they had that particular plane because supposedly if you could fly that plane, you could fly any airplane in the inventory. Not exactly true, but you really had to know what you were doing to fly the plane. So I was doing well in pilot training. Then you had to take simulators. Went in and took a simulator and busted it. I mean, I couldn't fly the simulator worth anything. And I thought, my career's over with. Went back the next day, tried the same thing, couldn't do it. And then my instructor got in, and he couldn't fly the simulator either because it was broken. So I passed that. And then you can ask for planes, but the Air Force is putting you through over $1 million to put you through pilot training.
And how long have you been there at this point? How long is pilot training?
About a year.
Okay.
About a year, a little more. And you could put in what you request, but the Air Force needs is what you got. So there were some fighter slots, there were some transport slots, and I ended up with a Caribou, a C-7.
Describe that plane for me.
It was made in Canada. It's a short fill and short takeoff landing plane. It can carry about 27 combat-loaded American troops, or you could load it with little guys in Vietnam. You could probably load about 90 of them because they didn't have very much equipment and they were smaller people. You could go into a runway like, say, Las Vegas or Atlanta. The runway is over 2 miles long with 1,000 feet on the other end. A Caribou, you could land on a mountaintop and an unimproved runway and make it in there alive. So that's what it was. It was to get troops. You'd take people into battle. You'd take them food. You'd take ammunition. You would take whatever they needed. And then at the end of the day, the last run would be picking up all the body bags, everybody that died that day, and you'd fly them back to the mortuaries. Very sobering job. Very sobering job. You'd make jokes about it sometimes. Well, how do you load the dead body? There'd be straps until they sit up and everything like that. And that sounds like it's just terrible. But the catch is if you watch MASH, when they're doing operations, life and death, and they're making jokes, Hawkeye and that crowd, because that's where you keep your brain together. So you made jokes about some of the stuff to do, but you did your job very seriously.
How long did you train to fly that plane?
I went from pilot training to Dyess Air Force Base in Texas, and 3 months.
And what did you think of it when you got in there?
Oh, it was a challenging plane. It was good. We'd do things like do airdrops. So we had this huge pallet with a parachute on it, And I'm coming along, and they had put a target, and everybody was missing. Well, I was a hunter. I was using Kentucky windage and everything else like that. Then pretty soon I hear my instructor going, "Hey, they're running," because, man, I almost hit the target. And it was a challenge. I knew what I was doing and why I was doing it. When I graduated from that, we went to Fairchild Air Force Base to go through winter survival school. They told us the most important thing to do is stay dry. Stay dry. Well, this is Washington State, and big, huge flakes of wet snow is coming out. So they haul us out to the area and drop us off, and everybody's wet to the skin in the first 15 minutes. And you were wet like that for the next couple of weeks. You had to run a course, an obstacle course at night. And then I heard everybody being captured when they got to the end, so I'm just out there waiting. And then on the speaker it says, "All right, all you smart Alex, come in." So I went in, and immediately you're captured. You're captured and put in POW place. And you had to survive that. You went through interrogation, and I mean, you got hurt doing some of that.
Was that sobering as well?
Very sobering, because you knew that, hey, I'm going to Vietnam. If I go down, I need to remember what this is like. And they taught you well. So I survived that. And what's the odd thing is, once I got to that done, we went to California, to fly out of California to the Philippines, and I had to go through jungle survival school. So I was in the POW box. I mean, you couldn't stand up, you couldn't stretch out, everything. You had a bag over your head, and you're supposed to be going, "I'm an American fighting man. I serve in the forces to guard my country and my way of life. I am prepared to give my life in its defense." And you believe those words. And I was also thinking, this is Thanksgiving. I'm getting dumped on, and I don't like it. And they actually fed us Thanksgiving. We had pumpkin soup, a little pumpkin rind, and hot water. That's all you got. But that's really what they had served in Vietnam to POWs. So I survived jungle survival when I got to the Philippines. And then I went to Cam Ranh.
So was that the Philippines was your stop before Cam Ranh?
Yep, but that's to go to jungle survival school.
Yeah,
because you were fighting in the jungle, and you'd be shot down anywhere. So you need to know what you were doing.
Tell me about flying into Cam Ranh.
Flew into Cam Ranh at night. We land. A school bus comes out. It's got wires on the windows and everything else like that. And they drive us in the dark to a hooch. Now, hooch is just a metal building where you slept. They just dropped you off, and that was it. They left. I knock on the door, go in, met my roommate, and he wasn't looking too good. So I'm asleep, wake up the next morning, he's already gone out flying. And then the next time I expected to see him was the next day, and by then he was in hospital. He got amoebic dysentery because you ate wherever it was. He lost 40 pounds through his rear end before they shipped him home, and he probably died by the time he got home. So that was sobering.
What was your first flight assignment there?
So I was a co-pilot. I was fresh out of pilot training. Co-pilot, you go with somebody who's flown. I went over with 8 people who went to Caribous and learned to fly, and I was the first one to upgrade to aircraft commander. I knew how to fly that plane. I was a good pilot. The squadron commander there wanted, anytime a plane was hurt in combat or anything else like that, you had to have a check flight on the plane. So I flew with him on check flights, and everything he wanted done, I had already prepared and done by the time he called for it. I just knew what to do. So he immediately upgraded me to aircraft commander, and I got some good timing.
What was a typical mission there on Cam Ranh?
You'd wake up and go to the chow hall, which you needed to eat there because you didn't know what if you're even going to eat the rest of the day. And if you got biscuits or pancakes or waffles or whatever else like that, all made with the same batter, it was a different shape. The food was okay. It was edible. You could do all right there. A lot of times the electricity was off, so you would go take a shower, cold shower. It had a wine bottle with a candle in it, light the candle, and you shaved by the light of the candle, and then you'd go out fly. You would get a fragmentary order, and it would give you the bases you were supposed to go to, and they'd have ALCs there, airlift control elements. So you were told by the Air Force, here's what you're going to do, but it was the Army mission, so you would do what the Army needed. So you would take people out to the field, or you'd put ammunition, you'd take water, you'd have POL balls. In other words, all the petroleum, the stuff that runs tanks and everything else like that, they were big, huge roll, and you would haul them. That would get you all out. And then you would pick up whatever was there. Now, the catch is you didn't know who was going to be there. And it's embarrassing for the United States, but then some of the crews picked up Vietnamese. Now, it was a civil war. It was the North and South. They all looked alike. And so some of pilots that I knew got congratulatory letters from North Vietnam, thanks for moving our troops. Because they were there to move. You were told you were going to move somebody, you moved them. And you were actually moving the enemy. So war is that crazy. It really is that dumb.
And you were talk about the places you'd land and stuff. Some of those were really short and.
Oh yeah, short real run race and really bad. You used to haul. Only way they got fresh meat was for bringing live stuff in. So one time we had a hog in a cage, and there's going to be. And then next thing I know, as the pilot come by, we were sitting up here, and the loadmaster comes up and jumps between our seat. And I look back, and there's a hog had gotten out. It was a big hog out of the cage. And so the flight mech dropped the back of the plane, the ramp, and the hog goes squeal up there all the way to the ground. So somebody got fresh meat that day. But we would haul in frozen meat, but Vietnam's hot. Near the equator, it's warm, and it would melt, and sometimes it got blood all over the place. So I remember landing at one of the forward bases, and a major came out. He was the maintenance officer. And I told him, boy, it was just a bloody mess, man. It was just really, really tough. And he thought I had brought in troops that were, and finally he started getting sick. I says, no, I just brought in frozen meat this time. We got shot at. One time I was going into B-52s, and B-52s was one of the forward bases. And you have precision approaches like you do with a commercial airline, and it brings you right to the end of the runway on glide slope, and you can land in the weather. Then you got non-precision approaches. Well, in Vietnam, it was mainly non-precision approaches. Well, there was a guy on the ground in B-52s that needed to be picked up and taken to the airport, to the hospital. So I'm up there, I'm circling, so I start this non-precision approach. And you couldn't see out of there. You looked at your instruments, you couldn't see through nothing but fog. And I hit minimums. Now, minimums is where the lowest you're supposed to go. But I knew I didn't have enough gas to go anywhere else because I was there trying to pick up this guy that needed us. So I dropped it another 100 feet. Then I was just really, really nervous. Co-pilot looked at me. I dropped it another 100 feet. And there's hills out there. And then I heard the tower call because he saw me. He says, you're cleared to land. And I turned toward where the runway was, and I was below the runway. I quickly pulled up and landed. Well, they brought the guy out in an ambulance. We floor loaded him, tied him to, and I I took off after refuel and flew him back to Cam Ranh Bay, where you go to the hospital. And then they wanted to send me out again. And I said, I'm not going again. And I described why. They just took, but I thought, this is foolish, man. I almost died this time. I'm not going to buy from this. And there were other times you had to go to the runway. You needed good tires. And here I was a lieutenant. Maintenance officer comes out and I says, those tires aren't good enough. I'm not taking it. He says, Lieutenant, you have to take that. I says, no, I don't. So they brought out the colonel, and the colonel looked at the tires, and he looked at the captain and says, give him some new tires. So even as a first lieutenant, you had authority to do things, and if you were smart about it, you stayed alive. If you weren't smart about it, you died.
Tell me about, you told me that you would come down and hit hard, right? You'd take the energy out of the plane. Can you describe that? And then the cockpit would fill with dust a little bit. Describe that for me.
Okay. Flying a Caribou was something different. It was made by de Havilland in Canada. Good plane, 2 prop engines, R2000s. Flight planning was easy in it. You could do 120 knots. So if you wanted to go 100 miles, you knew how long it took, 2 miles a minute. That was it. You could do flight planning very, very easily. Helicopters would come blasting right by us because they could outrun us. Problem was the helicopters is they could only fly about 8 hours, and they had to do a whole maintenance thing on them. With the Caribou, we could fly forever. They'd do whatever maintenance was necessary, but we could fly forever. So you would get on final, and you're going to a runway that was dirt or PSP, pure steel planking. It was a sheet of metal, but it all had holes in it because you needed something lighter, and they put there. And you needed to land in the first 200 feet of the runway. If you didn't land in the first 200 feet, you ran off the end of the runway, which was on a mountain, which means you went over the other side, and not good thing. You would come down to a landing speed where you're just barely hanging in the air. I mean, you're sitting on a stall, flaps on a runway, on an airplane, help you slow down. Flaps come down, and by FAA rules, you couldn't have over 30 degrees of flaps. The catch is the Caribou had 30 degrees of flaps, and then they had an overflap, then pulled down further for 60 degrees of flaps. It's like a barn door. So you're just hanging in the air, and you're going to the slowest speed you could, and the throttles and the prop levers were all in the top of the plane. So you're flying with your hand up here, you got your yoke here, and you would slow down and then hit within that first 200 feet, and immediately take your left hand, close the window of the Caribou because it wasn't air conditioned, reach down for the nose wheel steering, push the throttles up in the top of the plane, pulling back. You see 2 blue lights. And once you saw those, you'd pull back, and then the plane's props were going in reverse, where they were blowing all the dust and all the other crap that's the end of the runway in front of you, so then you couldn't see out of the plane. And then you looked down to the only instrument you could believe, which was your heading indicator, and hope that it was good, and you would put the brakes on and hold your left hand on the nose wheel steering to stop. And then you stop and you pull the thing out of reverse, put it in forward thrust, and blow all the smoke away. And that way you found out where you were on the runway. It was a challenge. Every time you did it, it was a challenge, but you knew you had to do it and do it right or else you died.
And you do tons of these missions every day.
You do as many as 20 missions a day. There's all kind of rivers in Vietnam. Mekong goes through their other rivers, and the Army needed to go from point A to point B, where there were roads that would take them around to get there, but they were dangerous to take those roads. But I could take off in my Caribou and not even bring my gear up and land at the next runway and drop the troops off at the next place, and that way they didn't have to drive through all the dangerous areas.
How would you know you were being shot at? You got any of those stories?
Yes, sometimes you would see a flash from the ground, and then when you landed, a lot of times you just see fuel dripping out.
What was that like for you when you saw that? Was that like, wow, do we dodge one?
There's nothing you could do with Caribou. You just can't outrun bullets. It just couldn't. So how you got around it? This is what you did. You would fly right above the forward Air Force air base, Army base, whatever base was. And there was about a 3,000-foot perimeter around the base where they had guns where they could stop and things. And you would fly over the top, and then you would start aiming toward the end of the runway doing circles, just oblong circles. And whatever it is, you wanted to end up right over the end of the runway at a landing attitude. Now, I remember the first flight I went out with an instructor, and you learn to fly. You fly a downwind, a base, turn final, and land. And I started to do that at the first base, and he just yelled at me, "You're going to get us killed." Never do that. It's predictable. So you would fly it in so it was not predictable and stay within that parameter, which was hard to do. And you'd end up about 200 feet over the end runway and landing. And you just learn how to do that.
How many other Caribous were, like how many planes were you flying out of Cam Ranh?
There were 5 squadrons, 4 of them at Cam Ranh Bay, 1 of them at Tan Son Nhut, 1 of them at Vung Tau. And you flew. That's what you did.
Anybody ever get shot down?
Yes.
Any of the Caribous?
Yes. There was one operation, I'm trying to remember the name of the field, and it was one that the French had been fighting for before the Americans got there. And they needed a lot of support. So the first guys came in and dropped the news, couldn't land, airdropped, and the next one airdropped, and then they figured out how much time, and then some of them got blasted coming down.
Mm.
And so then they did it at night. You turn off all your lights and everything else like that. That worked sometimes, and sometimes it didn't. So a lot of planes got shot down.
What was life on Cam Ranh Bay like?
You lived in a hooch. There were no revetments for you to get in. So when you got attacked by mortars and rockets and stuff like that, there was nowhere to go. A lot of times when rockets came in, you might grab your helmet and your flak vest, but then you'd get on top of the hooch with your cameras to take pictures of what was going on because you had to do something. I still remember being up at the officers' club, and you're sitting there having drinks with friends, and one of the sappers had gotten in to blow up the ammunition dump. And stuff was rockets and everything was coming out. And we were nobody had to tell you, you were on the floor trying to sink through the floor. And then I realized I'm at the O Club. My drink is up there. I'm not going to be any safer down here than I am up there. So I just went bellied up to the bar, and then everybody joins me, and we watched the ammunition dump blow up. Well, it was in sand. It was we were on a beach area. So the next morning we get up, and out on the picnic tables the sand was building up because it was raining down on top of us because it was all in the air. Well, they had a mission called Iran, and it's not the country. It's inspect and repair as necessary. And I was supposed to fly out of Cam Ranh that day. So I went, and I'm headed to the Philippines. The Caribou's not pressurized. You weren't supposed to fly it over 10,000 feet. You'd go maybe 1,200 feet, but 10,000 was your limit because you run oxygen. So I'm headed there, and I didn't want to turn around and go back and get bombed again. And I was doing DR, dead reckoning. Once you're 120 miles out of way from all the navigation eggs, they aren't any good anymore. So you're just, and I see this huge thunderstorm in front of me. And I thought, I'm going to die. So I didn't want to run into that because they'd just wreck your plane. You're done for. So I took a 45-degree cut for 30 minutes. Then I took a 45-degree cut back the other way for 30 minutes. Now, we needed more fuel, so we had a fuel donut inside the plane, and it had a bicycle pump. And so the flight mech would pump the bicycle pump and put fuel back into the wings. And then we hit the Philippines in this thing called the ADIZ, it's the Air Defense Zone. Whereas if you aren't cleared to cross that and you aren't at the right place, they can shoot you down. Well, I'd already gone 90 minutes out of the way. There's no weather to tell you what the winds are and everything else like that. But I came within a couple of miles of where I landed. We landed in the Philippines, Subic Bay. It was a Navy base. And they were trying to get me in the revetment. So the Navy guys out there give me directions. And I'm going, no, we can't do that. And I put it in reverse and backed into the revetment. And the Navy guy he'd never seen a plane back up like that. Now, backing up a Caribou, the problem is the revetment's usually at an angle, and you don't have brakes that work when you're going backwards. So you got to be able to pull it out of reverse and pull it forward before it goes back too far. So.
Okay. All right. How did your first tour end? How did that end? And you ended up, because you ended up in the B-52. That's what I want to talk about next. Okay.
Well, you had a rotation time. We were pulling out of Vietnam. They were building up. I told you about the Officer Club. Officer Club, they were building a new bar, new pool, and everything else like that, bringing in new trucks and new everything else like that. And I thought, this is dumb. So I went over to the contractors. Why are you still building this? Don't you know we're leaving? And he says, sir, I got a contract. If I don't fulfill it, I don't get paid. The government has hired me to do this. I'm going to do it. So we left the South Vietnamese with all that stuff. But it just takes a while for things to change. It just does. The squadron commander really liked me, so I took him to his Finney flight. And in Vietnam, we had mustaches that were out of limits. If you got the one that was regular, it looked like Hitler. So I had a big red mustache, out of limits, and everything else like that. Because, we were just flying combat all the time. And I thought, where can they send me? I'm already here. And the squadron commander said, Herrington, if you'll cut off that mustache, you'll get promoted. And he hopped in the plane and left. So I had another friend that had been in Strategic Air Command, and he says, you don't want to do that. You just don't want to do that. Well, the orders came down for me to go to B-52s. They needed bomber pilots. So I left Vietnam and immediately went to B-52 training.
Where was that at?
Well, I was stationed at Robbins. So I landed at Robbins and all the planes are gone. They're all in Guam. That's where they're needed. And so then I went to California and Castle Air Force Base. And this is up from Napa Valley and everything else like that. I knew I was going back to Vietnam. So we went to the wineries, we went to the fruit places, and it was really, really nice then. But I was learning to fly the B-52. Well, to go from a Caribou, a little plane, to a B-52 was a big, big jump. But the first time I got my hands on it, I could fly it. Did all right. I still remember one of the first flights. We were going low level because we were practicing bombing, which with nuclear training you would fly low level, 600 feet or less from the ground, no matter what the ground was doing. And so I was flying co-pilot seat, and instructor in the pilot seat, he says, well, you want to look out the wing? I gave him the plane, looked out the wing, and the engine was just going all over the place. The B-52 wing, 185 feet of wing, has 17 feet of arc. So I said, no, I don't want to look at that. I took the plane. But I learned how to be a good co-pilot. They liked what I was doing as a co-pilot.
Describe that plane from a pilot's point of view.
It's big, and it makes so much noise. You got 8 engines, and so we would say we didn't take off. We scared the earth away. You need to know your systems. You've got a pilot who's aircraft commander. You got a co-pilot who assists in flying the plane. You've got a navigator who tells you where to go. You would swear he was the commander because he's always telling you where to go. Then a radar navigator who has a bigger scope, and he does air refueling, helps you find your tanker so you can get your fuel, and he helps do it with the bombing. And then behind the plane in the back is a electronic warfare officer, and he tries to jam missiles that are aimed at you. And then you got a gunner who would be trying to shoot down any fighter that comes behind you. And the gunner has shot down planes in Vietnam. You are responsible as the pilot, especially as the aircraft commander, for all of those crew positions and how they knew how to do the job and everything else like that.
And how heavy did it fly? You didn't fly it unless it was full, right? Generally,
on training flights, you didn't. You could change the fuel, whatever you needed. So the plane is built as structure. You were not supposed to be in the air over 488,000 pounds. That's big. But on takeoff roll out of Guam, you would be well over 500,000 pounds. Because on takeoff roll, all the engines would just peg, and you would burn up 10,000 pounds of water in the first 110 seconds, and you would burn up thousands of pounds of fuel. So by the time you got to the end of the runway, you were supposed to be about 480,000 pounds, and you could take off.
Describe the water thing so people understand that.
It had 8 engines, and you needed more than 8 engines to get you off the ground. So 8 engines at full throttle would not get you off the ground. So in order for an engine to have thrust, you need mass of air coming through, and T1, the temperature of the air coming in, versus T2, temperature coming out of the engine. Basically, you do mathematical things. That's where your thrust was. So in order to get the engines to work better, you would spray water into the front of the engine, and that would give you more mass flow, and it would also cool down the air that was going in there. So it was like having a 9th engine.
And you had enough water to last how many?
110 seconds.
So if you blew it, you blew it.
Yeah, but we never blew it. If you were in Guam watching airplanes take off, we would fly in 3 ships. 3 planes would take off, just one after another. And if you're standing at the end of the runway, you would watch each bomber go to the end of the runway and then disappear. I mean, out of sight, not going up, going down. And I remember the first takeoff, I got to the end of the runway and we weren't at flying speed. I thought, I am really going to die this time. What I had not taken into account is there was a 600-foot drop off into the runway. It's an island. And so basically you take off and you start putting your gear up. Once the flap's going up and you're going down that 600 feet, then all of a sudden you're at flying speed and you can fly and take off. So miles down the way, you would then see 3 loops of black smoke as these 3 bombers just fighting for altitude. And you just got used to that once you knew what was going to happen. That's what you're going to do. The plane never failed me for that. There was one B-52, though, that took off in the weather. And the problem with the weather, you can't see out. Took off, and you could get a low-speed stall if you're going too slow, or a high-speed stall if you're going too fast. And either way, it's dangerous. And then he took off, and the weather was really bad, and the pitot tubes, which gives you your speed, froze over. He didn't know what speed he was at, and he was actually in a high-speed stall, and he thought he was in a low-speed stall, and they crashed off the end. The pilot didn't do anything particularly wrong. It's just that was what happened.
Yeah.
Now in in Guam, you take off and you would go right over a Russian trawler. And the Russian trawler had fishing gear out and radars all over the place. So this was a 24-hour day. 24 hours a day, bombers taking off. And they knew how long it took to get to target. So they would notify the North Vietnamese, you got another 3 ship coming. They just took off here. Then they knew to expect us a certain time. We called it the Dr. Pepper War also, 10, 2, and 4. The Dr. Pepper bottle used to have 10, 2, and 4. That's supposed to just to get a PEP. Well, maintenance ran the schedule. Unless maintenance had a chance to get the planes ready, you couldn't take off. So we did have a schedule like that. It was quite predictable. We had so many planes that were there combat ready, they couldn't all land at Guam. So you would have planes in the air all the time because there wasn't room for you on the ground. And once you landed after a combat mission, you'd have to taxi over to where they would refuel the plane. Then you'd have to have another crew come out there and taxi it over to where they put the bombs on the plane. And then another crew that came out and moved them back to the revetments where you could pick up your plane to go.
So it was just a constant rotation.
Constant rotation, 24 hours a day you were there.
How many B-52s were there at Guam, based in Guam?
I wish I knew the number. I'm not.
There's a lot, though.
There was a lot of planes there, maybe 80 planes.
And I told you, because I've talked to a medic who flew out of that same base, and he said how just down and dirty that base was, that it wasn't very fancy.
No, you were sitting next to the deepest trench in the Pacific Ocean, the deepest trench in the world, Marianas Trench. And you're sitting right, if you could see the island, it had a very little pinnacle. If part of that broke off, the whole island would fall in. It hasn't, but that's what it was. The base exchange was open most of the time. The gym was open most of the time. The food hall was open if you wanted to go there.
Was the food any good or no?
It was edible. It was the Navy has good food. Tim Martin.
Tim said that about the submarine.
It's true. The Navy had good food because they know they didn't get anything else. But the Air Force had a decent enough place to stay.
So your schedule, would you fly 5 times a week when you were there?
It depended on what was needed for missions. It really did. You were ready to fly all of the time. You would fly and then have 12 hours off and you could fly again right then. And the missions were sometimes 20 hours. You'd fly from Guam thousands of miles over. It's just quiet. And all of a sudden, then you're over a country getting shot at and you were hoping that you were making it through the bomb run area. And then all of a sudden you were flying back to Guam.
Would you have to refuel on that mission or no?
Most of the time, we did not refuel when we were going to Guam standard everyday mission. When we went to Hanoi, you wanted to get a mass of planes there. And so we would fly over and refuel over the Philippines or over Japan. And a tanker would meet you. You'd load up fuel. And then sometimes, if you were there for long enough, you'd have to meet another tanker to get enough fuel to get back to Guam. But I know that on some missions, we were just out of gas. When your fuel gauge, even on your car, but especially an airplane, when it starts going to empty, you really don't know how much fuel you have in there. It's a little float, and you don't know. So I have been on final at Guam, and I told the crew, if you see the red light, bail out. We are out of fuel, and I can't get to the field.
Talk to me about the cockpit is very tiny, and the controls. Give me a little of that from your perspective.
You pull a ladder down, and you climb up into the bottom of the plane, and there's a ladder that goes up the top of the plane. That's where the pilot sits and the defensive people sit, and then first level you had gotten to, that's where the navigators sit. The only place you can stand up is on the ladder going up between the two decks. You have a urinal in the back. It stinks. There was a 06, a full colonel in charge of maintenance, and his job was to put those little blue tablets in the urinals because you're up there 20 hours, and if it stinks too much, you get sick, and that's the dangerous thing. So it was that higher level. And then Playboy magazine wanted to do an article on crews. And they said, we hear you're anal retentive. And they were talking about, the catch is you had a garbage bag that you'd put over this little stool, and that's all. So it would smell up everything tight quarters. Most people did not go because if you were the one that went, you were the one that's supposed to come back and clean it up too. So yeah, I have been sometimes, especially on cruise that I did not trust the co-pilot. I never got up out of the seat. 20 hours, never doing anything else besides flying the plane.
And the seat itself, you said it has one cushion on there.
It has a cushion because you're sitting in an ejection seat, has something like a 50 caliber shell under you. And if you raise the arms of the seat and push the handles, you blew up right through the top of the plane. And then automatically the parachute would come out, and then you would be pushed away from the ejection seat. Now, that's for the pilot and co-pilot, the electronic warfare officer, and the gunner. The navigator and radar navigator were downstairs. They ejected going down. That's fine if you're at altitude. But if you're just taking off and something goes wrong and they eject, they die. When you're practicing low-level flying, the radar sees a big picture until you get down to about 400 feet above the ground, and it's a very small picture. You can't see that far. Those guys were brave to sit down there, and they had to trust me, and they trust me.
Tell me about your friend that had to eject, and he lost his...
I had another good friend that in a B-52, a D model, and he was just a big guy. And so he came in, he was over Vietnam, he had been hit, he had to eject. He ejected, but he couldn't get his elbows in far enough, so it took the edge of both elbows off. And so he was captured, became a prisoner of war, but they took him to the hospital and did the best they could to repair him.
Wow.
So,
refueling, talk about that. It's a little hairy, seems like.
Refueling is you got to have fuel to keep the plane going. And if you're really low on fuel, the most beautiful thing in the world is the back end of that KC-135. Refueling is a planned collision. You fly your B-52, you fly it right into the boom that's sitting down there, and there's a boomer laying on this is when the tanker was a KC-135. He's laying on his belly, and he can maneuver the plane a little bit, but not a whole lot. And what you would do, fly up a line. You come up, the radar navigator will get you close to the tanker, and the tanker's in front of you, and you finally see it, you're a couple thousand feet. Then you start flying up a line. So you put the tip of the boom, which is hanging down, on the tip of the nose, and just fly up that line. So you get really close, then you'd stop, and then the boomer would say cleared in, and then you'd fly in. And once you connected, then there's lights under the tanker that tell you where you are within the area. And if you are hooked to the boom, I mean, there's latches. If you fly out of that, you break the boom off. Not a good thing. So you come up there, and you get up there, and the boom operator would say, move 3 feet up. And I'm going, I got a $400,000 plane, pound paint. You expect me to move 3 feet? He says, if you want your fuel, move up 3 feet. You'd move up 3 feet. But you had to have very deft with the throttles. You got 8 engines. You got to treat them very well, and you learned how to do it. And then I mentioned to you earlier, refueling at night in a somewhat stormy weather was confusing because the cloud bank you always think of clouds above you and the earth is right down here. Well, when the cloud bank is at an angle, you keep having to fight to try to stop yourself from trying to make what wasn't the earth blow you. And you'd get the lean sometime and lean over and then force yourself quick. And you'd mutter to yourself, that tanker's level, that tanker is level, that tanker's level. And then you'd use that as your attitude indicator.
And how close are you actually from the physical tanker, not the boom?
Oh, you're right under it. You're hooked to the boom. The boom's and planes have a tendency to want to do this. And so anytime the boom operator saw there was something dangerous, he'd say breakaway, and you'd throw your gear down, and the gear would just pull your nose down, and the tanker would push forward as much as he could.
And how long are you connected normally?
A 30-minute track would get you about 6,000 pounds of fuel per minute. So you got 30, 40,000 pounds of fuel.
That's crazy, the operation.
And when you're doing this, it's formation flying, close formation flying. The tanker is getting lighter and you're getting heavier. So you need to go faster. When they used to fly with the old KCs, the old tankers, you'd have to do what's called a slalom. The bomber needed to go faster. The tanker needed to go faster. And the way the tanker could do it was you'd start headed down toward the ground. And you'd be hooked up as long as you could and then break out from there.
And what altitude you usually do on the refuel?
30,000, 35,000.
And your bombing runs, is that what you were usually over in Vietnam?
It really depended where you were. You 30,000, 40,000, and $50,000 was our 50,000 feet was our top limit. But sometimes you were, and it's hard to fly the plane gently up there. You could stall very, very quickly. But when we were bombing like Hanoi, you just had planes stacked up all over the place. And you needed to hit target. No matter where you took off in the earth, you needed to be over target plus or minus 3 minutes. And you did it. You just did it.
And explain, you told me that you get the plane there, and just before the bombing run, you turn that over to talk about that.
Well, you come in and the pilot brings the plane in. With the direction of the radar navigator. Well, once you get in that position, usually you would turn the plane back over on autopilot to the radar navigator because he could directly take you to the target. He could keep giving you, and you could fly it. But it was just better many times to have the radar navigator, who was the bombardier, bring you into the target, drop the bombs, and you took it and you left from there.
And the other thing you said that I thought was interesting, you talked about the co-pilot is constantly adjusting where the fuel is.
Fuel is all over the plane, but plane needs to have the center of gravity in the right place or it quits flying. If the fuel as center of gravity goes too far out, the plane will crash. So he's constantly moving fuel around to make sure the weight is in the right place. It's all pre-planned. But landing speed is dependent on fuel because fuel is weight, 6 pounds per gallon or so, something like that. So I had one friend that was from Robins Air Force Base. They get hit. A SAM went off right in front of them, took out part of their engines, and they had to land at a forward base in Vietnam, a base that was not equipped for B-52s. So they come down finally and realize that the fuel gauges weren't working because part of the engines were out, and the engines that were out were the ones that ran the alternators, which gave you electricity. So they didn't know how much fuel was in there. So they came down with the planned fuel that they had, but they were leaking like a sieve, and they were coming too fast and couldn't land. So they had to go around. Then they had to go and says, "It didn't work last time. We'll just take 10 knots off our landing speed and hope that works." Took 10 knots off. They landed and they skidded off the other end of the runway. Well, it was a minefield out there. They didn't know what to do. The -1, which is the manual that tells you how to fly the plane, they were flying a D model plane, had the gunner in the back. And the manual says you can't get the gunner out. Tell that to a bunch of Marines that were at that air base. They came in with axes and everything else like that, and they knew the path to get through the minefield, and they broke the gunner out, and everybody else just followed in. So it's a magnificent plane. World War II, B-17 was a beautiful plane, which is World War II movies. It was made by Boeing. And then the B-29 was the one that dropped the atomic bombs. And then they had the B-47, which, again, Boeing bomber. So the B-52 was a Stratofortress. So they went from Flying Fortress to the Super Fortress to the Stratofortress. In between all that, they had flown a B-36, which had 6 prop engines, which were pusher props, and 4 jets on the tips. Arthur Godfrey, who was a famous guy in movies and stuff, said he flew the B-36. And he says, when you took off, it was like rotating a city block. You pull and you pull, and you finally get to the end of the runway, and it just barely gets in the air. But once you were in the air, it could stay there forever, just about. And even if you needed an oil change, you could have a maintenance guy through the wing put oil in the engine. Amazing planes. It was called the Peacekeeper, and it was never Peacemaker. It was never flown in combat, but it scared the Russians.
Talk about you told me the landing gear is peculiar on the B-52.
Most planes, if you're going to land and there's crosswind, which a lot of times the wind's going to blow right down the runway. And the way you land that plane is you drop the wing down so you're flying straight into the runway. And that works on most planes. Problem with B-52 is 185 feet of wing. If you drop the wing down and the tip hits the ground before you do, then you do hit the ground and everybody dies. So they had to figure out some way to make this work. So this way you turn the nose right into the wind, and you're going crabbing in, and you take the gear that is down there, 4 trucks of gear, and you turn them down the runway. So when you land, if it's a 40-knot cross, your body is at the front part of the plane, out past the runway, and the rest of the plane is behind you. And it takes a while to figure out how to do that, but it works. And you do that a couple of times, and then you can trust it and do that. I don't know of another plane that does that.
Yeah.
I think it's probably only one.
Guys getting shot down, how common was that? And was that always in your mind when you were flying, or did you even think about that?
Getting shot down?
Yeah.
We knew it happened. And once we went into Hanoi, the planes were shot down every night. Fact is, you would go out by the planes, and sometimes they had the Catholic chaplains out there giving him almost lax the rights, because some people would not come back. You would usually meet your friends at the officers' club at night and have a few drinks with them and everything else like that. But if your friends were drinking together one night and they got shot down, you didn't acknowledge that they were shot down. You knew it, but it's almost as if you admitted that they were shot down. It could be you next. You knew that, but you didn't talk about it. That is, in intel, they told us, well, what's it like to have missiles coming at you? And the intel guy says, well, it looks like a white telephone pole. And I'm going, oh, intel, you just don't know. The next thing I know is I'm over the target, and these white telephone poles start coming at me. And that's what it looked like. And then they would explode, and it's a reverse pyramid, all black. You'd see orange and then all black. And you want to stay away from that black because it's full of shrapnel. And if the shrapnel went into your engine was wiped out, and then you were in bad shape. Then they had radars that would come. This is the height finder radar. They could tell the altitude, and then the radar that goes around there gives you azimuth. So you need to know azimuth and height in order to have a targeting thing. So we could jam with our B-52 little antennas as long as you had your belly to the ground, you could jam the radar so they couldn't tell how high we were. So they started flying MiGs, fast jets, behind us to tell them how to set the missile so it could blow up at the right altitude. But they kept coming in behind the B-52s, and we had 4 75 caliber machine guns, and you could lay a wall of lead out there, and you were firing back, and they were coming forward, and you could just wipe out the plane. So pretty soon they quit trying to do that because they lost too many of the jets coming after us.
Retell the story. You said you had a friend who got shot down that you knew was a prisoner down there when you were bombing. Was that when you were bombing Hanoi?
Yes, it was. My last roommate at the Air Force Academy, a really good guy. I went to pilot training. He went to navigator training. So he would end up being a Gib, guy in the back.
Okay.
F4. He was a navigator, and he had flown a few missions, and he got shot down, and then nobody heard from him. Didn't know where he was. Assuming he was a prisoner, because they did not see somebody. They saw the plane crash, but they knew he had punched out. So he was a prisoner and after you're a prisoner of war, after 7 years and nobody said you're declared dead. So he was down there as a prisoner. Rough life. Hanoi, Hilton. And he was a good friend. So when we were targeted to bomb Hanoi, I knew the Hanoi Hilton was there. And I was saying a prayer sincerely, God, just don't let me kill my roommate. I just didn't want that to happen. So we went in and we punched the bombs out over the target, successful. Every 5 years, graduates of the Air Force Academy, their class a lot of times get together. So we got together. So when Chuck came back out of Vietnam, came back the same time others came back. His wife had already remarried, legal, because he was declared dead. And he had remarried. And I sat with him and says, Chuck, how did you stand that? He says, buddy, you got the same training that I did at the Air Force Academy. You would have made it too. And he spent he had physical problems coming back. He had problems sleeping at night and everything else like that. But he had a good lifetime. Remarried, they traveled the world and everything else like that. But then I got to attend his burial at the Air Force Academy. We were in Tiger 10, 10th Squadron, and the cadet Tiger 10 Squadron was there. And they saw all these old guys just coming and we tried to get a jet to fly over. We couldn't find one. We got a Cessna to fly over. That is, the chaplain, they had a Jewish chaplain from military, and he told about some of the prisoners. He says that they used to kill mosquitoes because there's a lot of, we're in the tropics, mosquitoes, and the prisoners were taking the mosquitoes, and you had the red blood and everything else like that, and put them on the wall. And then the guards looked at it, and what they were doing was making an American flag.
Funniest thing that happened to you over there that you remember? Funny story.
Well, one of the funny things is the time I got the scariest I slept in the top bunk in the hooch, guy behind me, and then we weren't supposed to hire weapons, but we had a AK-47 in the top and everything else like that. And all of a sudden, you turn the lights out. There's no windows in this thing. It's dark. And all of a sudden, bam, 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 really, really close to me. And I thought we were being shot. And what happened is there was a rat running, and then somebody had a 2x4, was trying to kill the rat. But I hit my head on the ceiling and everything, and I thought I was done for. Stupid stuff like that happened. Other things that happened, we would have parties on the beach. It was a nice beach. There was still Japanese pillboxes from World War II on the beach, but it was a beautiful beach. It was nice to go swim there. But there's one of the guys that just didn't fit in with the other guys. He kept to himself, and we had problems. So we had roasted a pig. I mean, pig roast, and the hog's head was left over. So guys got together and put it in a little plastic and then put it in the guy's bed. So when he opened up the door, there was a hog, he thought, lying in the bed. And we would expect him to yell and scream and everything, but he just closed the door, didn't say anything. We would do dumb stuff like that. And then guys would love to play cards. They'd play poker. In Vietnam, you couldn't have green currency. You couldn't have that because it was valuable. So they give NPCs looked like Monopoly money. It didn't look real, but it was money. And the guys would bet big time playing poker, and they'd get hugely in debt. And they thought, well, this is wartime, no problem. And then they'd fly back home, and the guys who were playing with them would follow them back home and demand they pay.
Wow.
So that's not necessarily funny, but that's the oddity of war.
The scariest moment when you were flying B-52s?
Getting shot at with SA-2s. The SA-2s, surface air missile, they are built by the Soviets to shoot down B-52s. And when you got those things barreling at you and you see other planes blow up, when a B-52 loaded with fuel and bombs is hit by a SAM and it hits close to the bomb bay, is a huge flames all over the place. And you realize when that happens, you've just lost the plane, but you've lost at least 6 crew members. And usually they were more. A lot of the colonels and other people would fly missions from Guam or wherever and fly one mission a month, because that way they got combat exemption for some of the income taxes. So you'd usually have more than 6 crew members.
Talk a little bit about the weapons you'd carry on there. How many bombs would you normally carry? And
it depended on the model of plane. The B-52D was an old airplane, had bigger wing, bigger bomb bay, and they would carry 500-pound bombs, and they would carry 500-pound bombs under the wings too. So they would have 100 or so 500-pound bombs loaded on that plane. It was loaded pretty heavy. In the B-52 that I flew, the G model, we would have 750-pound bombs, and they would be 35 up at least.
Wow.
And you'd fly in 3 ships, so you'd have 3 times that for the number of planes. And the bombs were dumb bombs. You could tell who the navigators were when they do pre-flight, because there's a little propeller at the end of the bomb, and so it had a wire through it. And so you'd go check your planes and be sure that all the wires were everything else like that, but the wires would stick into your flight suits. So the poor navigators always had holes in their flight suits. It was odd. Another story coming up after that, but you would do that. And so when you drop the bomb, the wire would pull out, the propeller would spin, then it would be ready to blow up. Now, Vietnam had a triple canopy. It had small plants, it had medium-sized trees, and it had big, huge trees. So you had to adjust sometimes, because a lot of times the bombs would blow up at the top of the canopy and would not reach the targets. So sometimes you had to adjust where the bombs would do it. But then the Arab nations around Israel decided the U.S. was busy in Vietnam, so they would go take over in Israel. So they started bringing all their planes, all their tanks and everything else like that. And again, this is when Nixon was president, and decided that that's just not going to happen. So they put us on alert with nuke bombs. And then we were told if the horn goes off, it's going to be real. We aren't doing practices now. If the horn goes off, this is real. Well, I just laid out in the sun and had some of that cocoa butter on because I was going to get a great tan. And the horn goes off. I'm sliding my flight suit on. I mean, it just slid on. We run to the planes, and they're out in Guam. Now, they're dark planes, and the sun's down on them, and it's over 100 degrees, so you're almost burning your hand holding the thing going up, and just miserably hot in there. And we realize we have to get all the stuff ready to go battle and everything else. And we're sitting there, and we're burning gas while we're doing that. And when you burn up too much gas, you can't make the round trip come back. And then finally, they called it off. And what had happened is that the alarm system was run by Bell Telephone, and a gecko had shorted the alarm system.
Wow.
Stuff happens. But everybody, but even before that, we went out, and I went out to check the plane. You got to do a pre-flight. And we open up the bomb bay because you got to check the weapons. And I look up there. Well, I hadn't looked. The radar navigator got in there. And he says, "Pilot, I need you to come out here." I says, "Why?" He says, "You'll see." Opened up and looked in there, and neither one of us recognized the weapon that was in there. We called command post, and quickly we had a bomb study on that new weapon, because that wasn't the weapon we had at our home base. It was shiny and beautiful, but we did the bomb study, and we were ready to set alert. And we set alert like that, and then we had actually launched some planes headed toward the Near East. And the Arabs saw them coming, and they turned their tanks around and went back the other way. The same thing for Strategic Air Command. Strategic Air Command, North Korea versus South Korea. The North decided it was going to come in and take over. And so, yay, Jimmy Carter. Yay, President Carter. He launched the fleet and headed that way. And again, North Koreans turned around and went back the other way. You had that threat, and it was a credible threat.
You were in Guam a year? Was your second tour a year? Or
No,
not that long?
What I would do is I was stationed at Robbins Air Force Base. Planes weren't there. So you would go to Guam, and you would be there 179 days. So almost 6 months. You'd be there. If you were there for 180 days, they couldn't send you back till a while. So they would always get you back home at 179 days or thereabout. And if you took off on a military plane and had aborted, came back, then they would escort the crew to the civilian runway under guard and make sure you got on the commercial plane and went home so they could send you back. So you'd go for 179 days. You'd live with the crew, bomb with the crew, and everything else like that. Then you'd go to home base for 29 days. And you basically did some training, but you're basically free for 29 days. But you didn't want to see the rest of your crew members because you just lived for the 100. And then you'd go back over 179 days. And you just did that over and over.
So how did it end, Vietnam, for you?
Finally, again, President Nixon decided that, hey, we've done enough. We've bombed Hanoi. Kissinger, you make some deals and everything else like that. And we said, we're done with the war. And we came home. But we came home because, again, the Soviets, the Arabs were doing stuff in the Middle East. So we landed and immediately went on alert. And so it was right back to alert. And you would be on alert for a week at a time. You'd live underground. You'd walk into your room and you had windows with curtains and everything else like that, but there was a concrete wall on the other side. And you lived by the planes. You had to be able to take off within minutes if the alert sounded. And usually a lot of people were in uniform all the time. My crew got tired of being in uniform, so we were in civvies. And then they have an alert practice. So the horn goes off and the people that were watching our practice go on. And so we run in the plane. We had a plane ready to go and everything else like that. And then they were ready to jump on my crew like big time when we got off. So we all got off. We were in uniform, combat boots, all the gear and everything else like that. And they just walked away. I says, and that became the standard then. Because I had my uniform, every piece of gear I had right where I needed it, made sense to me. So it worked.
How many years did you fly the B-52 then?
About 11 years.
And you were how long in the Air Force total?
28 years, 24 years active duty, 4 years Air Force Academy, which I was a cadet, so I was in the military. So 28 years.
And you love flying the B-52, would you say that?
Yeah, it was a challenge. I was good at it. When I came back to Robbins, I went from a regular crew to an experienced crew to a superior crew and became the chief of standardization evaluation, which means it was a bomber base, but it had tankers there. But I was head of the standardization as a captain. The colonel, who was the wing commander, had to fly with me or he couldn't fly. Uh, it was an important job. I was just doing the job. I was surprised as a superior crew, you had a white bippy, an ascot basically. And so when you walked in with ascot, they knew these are the guys that allowed you to fly. Like if you wanted a driver's license, you have to go to the patrol and drive with somebody. I was the guy who did that stuff. But then when I got orders to go somewhere else, I put a blue bippy back on, and I was treated so differently. I had a huge amount of power that I was somewhat aware of, but no, it was a good job. It was a challenge. I rose to the challenge. I went from there to Combat Evaluation Group at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. And there I had to maintain some of flight status, so I flew a T-39, a Saberliner, flew VIPs around, congressmen, etc., as an additional duty. But I was pretty efficient with my job, so I'd do my desk job. Everybody's over the corner drinking coffee, smoking, whatever, and I was at my desk doing work. I'd clear my desk. If there's nothing else to do, I'd go to the squadron and fly all day. That was fine. But Combat Evaluation Group was in charge of evaluation of all the wings worldwide that had to do with Strategic Air Command. So I was gone a lot in that mission, too. I did that for a couple of years. And then you needed to get promoted, you needed schools. So when I was flying combat B-52s, there's squadron officer school. So guys who were flying combat couldn't go to squadron officer school because they were busy flying, getting shot at. All the other people that were flying the missiles, they were sitting ground. They were doing their their squadron officers. They were getting promoted ahead of the other guys who were actually doing the job. And so SAC decided we need to send all these people to school too. So I went to squadrons officer school. You could do it by correspondence, so I did it by correspondence. They sent me in residence. At Barksdale, I was doing well at the job I had. I had done it by correspondence. They sent me in residence. So all of this was at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. And so I did well at school. I graduated high up. So they kept me as an instructor. And so I became a faculty instructor. Since I knew how Strategic Air Command operated, then I taught the 900 students.
You enjoy that?
From stage. I was a good instructor. I knew what I was talking about. They didn't know what they knew. They needed to know what I had told them. They knew they needed to pay attention because otherwise they wouldn't pass. If they didn't pass, they wouldn't get. I didn't have to worry about the motivational stuff.
Right.
I just got on stage, and then anytime like Tibbets, the gentleman pilot that dropped the atomic bombs, every time he came in, I escorted him. When General LeMay, who started Strategic Air Command, every time he came in, I escorted him. When he first came in, I said, General LeMay, can I ask you a question? Yes, you can ask me. He says, you were running as Vice President of Canada with George Wallace. Why did you do that? He says, simple. I wanted a national platform to talk about defense. And George Wallace gave me that. We went all over places. Huge crowds would come listen to us. And he got to give his speeches and talk about defense programs. He says, I knew what I was doing. And I thought, he did know what he was doing. He was an interesting character. Very interesting character. General LeMay says that he had a maintenance officer. He brought him in and says, I want to be able to talk to my crews wherever they are. By that, you need an HF radio, high-frequency radio. It's not a great radio, but it goes long range. And the maintenance colonel said, you can't do that with a plane. Says, fine. So he dismissed him. LeMay calls up friends and areas like that and retrofits a B-52 with an HF radio. He calls the colonel in and says, well, excuse me, I got to do the, picks up his phone and talks to somebody, and you could hear their discussion. And then after he got through with it, put it down. He says, where do you think that plane was? and the plane was flying over Alaska.
Wow.
The colonel got fired. LeMay was really harsh on officers. You need to do it all right. Enlisted guys, he appreciated that they had their problems too. So he invented the automobile hobby shops. He invented family services. So when a young recruit gets in and is married, you needed vacuum cleaners, other stuff like that. He took care of people like that. Then they put him in the Pentagon, and he was a warfighter. He was a little out of his element, but a smart guy, a hero for mine.
Well, you met a lot of people. You went a lot of places, had a lot of experiences.
When I was at Strategic Care Command, I was in Future Systems. In other words, my briefing was 2020. Now, this is 20 years before 2020.
Yeah.
Well before that. So I was the Sinks, the commander-in-chief. I was his briefer. So he had his own little dining room, and when VIPs came in, I was his briefer. If he wasn't available, I was the one that was sent in to eat with all the other guys. And that was interesting. He would have, it's called stand-up, and everybody's sitting down, but it was called stand-up, and I would sit right behind him. And the generals, if they asked a question, something like that, pretty soon I'd see a hand coming back, and I'd take the note, disappear. I knew where everything was, and everybody knew who I was, so I could go right in and interrupt whatever, get the answer, go back, sit down. His hand would be back. He'd be talking. Then all of a sudden, he'd give the answer just like he knew it all along. And General LeMay had started Strategic Command, designed how it was being done. And he was coming back to talk to the generals. And he came back and just nailed them. He says, "This place is just like I left it. When are you going to?" And they were all sitting back, not used to being talked to like that. But it was interesting. And it was interesting to work for a four-star general. It was.
The future of the B-52. I mean, how many years have been flying?
It's been flying since about 52. It wasn't designed for the year, but it was designed in the 40s.
Yeah.
And it started flying in 52. So it's been around for a long time. And they're expecting it to go for a full 100 years.
It's insane. Now,
it's the same airframe just about, but all the systems are changed and updated and everything else like that. It's not necessarily a forgiving plane. You got to fly it right. But I still remember taking out of Guam. I got a red light, which means there's a fire in the engine. I pulled it back. It didn't work. There's a shut off. Cut the fuel off. Light comes back on. I have to shut the second engine in that pod down. Then on a wing on the other side, an engine starts on flame. I had to shut that down. So I've just taken off. 8-engine plane. I got 5 engines. I was too heavy. The plane's too heavy to land. So I went out there and pulled the engines back and burned fuel for about 3 or 4 hours, came back and landed. I'm still around. It was a good plane.
Looking back, what's your take on flying, your career, Vietnam? When you look back at it now.
Vietnam was a lousy war. At the policy level, people misunderstood it. It was a civil war, North Vietnam against South Vietnam. We tried to make it into something else. There was the domino theory. If Vietnam falls, Thailand will fall, all the others will fall, a whole bunch of others will fall. And that was true. It happened. But so it happened. Did it make any difference? No. A lot of people died. I understand why we did it, but it was a lousy war. But they needed something like the B-52 to even keep things going. I remember going, first time I went to the Pentagon, I went to the POAC, the Pentagon Athletic Officers Club, gym. So basically I was going to run up and down the mall. And I was looking for the Vietnam Memorial. And the guy says, "Well, it's right over there." I didn't know that it was below ground. Nobody had told me. So I finally run up to the Lincoln Memorial, turn around and come back. Then I went by the memorial, and it's a beautiful design, little V shape right in the ground. And I went there where all the names were, and then all of a sudden I see names of people I knew. And I spent some tears there. So mixed bag. But again, like Vietnam, I built up Vietnam when I was flying Caribous, and I blew Vietnam away with B-52s. But Uncle Sam says do one thing, and you do it, and you do something else. When you follow orders. A nation that doesn't have an armed force that follows orders is in trouble.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you got to do smartly. Like Lieutenant Calley in Vietnam had killed a whole bunch of Vietnamese, and they wanted to put him in jail, and they did. And he was just following the orders he got, but they were somewhat illegal orders. Me, as a first lieutenant flying Caribous in Vietnam, we had these big fuel donuts that we carried around that had fuel in them. Lieutenants we got together says, man, that one looks familiar. So we started marking a special mark on the fuel donut. And if it was the same mark you'd seen before, you refused to haul it. Well, the catch was the guys that were the officers were trying to have more cargo moved, so their officer evaluation were looking good because they hauled a lot of stuff. But if you're hauling stuff that didn't need to be hauled, that was dumb. Well, a bunch of lieutenants got together and says, this is dumb, we're not doing it. So sometimes if you're even lower down, you need to do the right thing because sometimes the orders are dumb.
Yeah.
But you have to be very careful and know what you're doing. When I went to Vietnam, I'd had 4 years at the academy, a year of pilot training. I was prepared to go and face combat. The 19-year-old had just graduated from high school and was sent to Vietnam, was not prepared. And a lot of them died because they weren't prepared.
Yeah.
But then for Strategic Air Command, that's serious business. The Soviets were on alert. We were on alert. While I was working at Space Command, I even took a Russian pilot through to see our radars and everything else like that. And I knew what level I could disclose and all that. Then we had lunch. And we're sitting there eating lunch, and he says, I don't want to go to war against you. I said, that's the reason we showed you this. I don't want to go to war with you either. And it was a believable threat. It was called MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction. If you bomb us, we bomb you, we both die. And then we had the race for the missiles. We had a whole lot of missiles. They had a whole lot of missiles. If you wanted to wipe out one of their missiles, you couldn't send one missile. You had to send 2 or 3 because you wanted assured destruction. Well, whoever shot first shot all their missiles, and then so you received a whole bunch of damage, but then you had other missiles. They had nothing to fire back at you. So you didn't want to do that launch. Both sides knew that. And then we have satellites all over the place watching what's happening. All of a sudden, the Soviets got an indication that they were being attacked. I mean, the systems told them that. There was an equivalent lieutenant colonel, Russian, and he says, I don't believe this is really happening. This is not real. Give it some more time. And then they found out that it was not a launch. It was a problem with their system. That guy saved the world. I mean, that was important stuff.
Yeah.
So I worked at SAC headquarters for a while, and then they liked the work I did, so they sent me to Air War College. I had already done War College by correspondence. They sent me in, but actually sent me to War College, and that's where you kind of get people really polished up for stuff. Well, they sent me to CADRE, the Center for Aerospace Doctrine, Research, and Education. So I was working for Strategic Air Command, for a colonel that worked for there. I was working for the instructors that were teaching War College, and I was working for writing a paper at CADRE. So I had 3 colonels that were in charge of writing my evaluation. That's being pulled really hard, but it was really interesting. We were doing important work, and it's been done. And then out of that, I wrangled an assignment, since I'd worked for a general before that I knew the personnel system. I wrangled an assignment in the Space Command. My father-in-law had died. My mother-in-law needed help. So I went to Space Command. They needed people like me there. Space Command, Air Force Space Command had just started. A bunch of lieutenants that were smart. Academically, they knew all kind of stuff. But if they were in the middle of a battle, a military battle, they wouldn't even realize that they were there. Well, I had done planning. I knew how I knew how all the systems worked together. They didn't know how to write an op order. I knew how to write an operational order, and I taught them all that. And then while I was there, we put the satellites in for GPS. GPS was started by the military.
Yeah.
And Space Command was just very, very interesting. Again, I ran into the problem. They kept sending me to the Pentagon. I would be at the Pentagon for 6 months in a row. I could be in the Hilton, the Marriott, whatever. But you get tired of staying in there. And I had to be in the area where my office was right across the freeway from the Pentagon. It was Crystal City, and there were military offices there. So that was my workspace. I was working in the Pentagon there, and I was gone for 6 months in a row, and that just got old. So after 10 years at Space Command, orders came down to send me to the Pentagon, and I refused the orders. Says, "Sir, you realize you have to get out." And I says, "Yeah, you aren't going to talk to your wife." "No, we aren't going back to the Pentagon." Working in the Pentagon, the building itself is interesting.
Yeah.
To get into the building, you would have to get up 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Took you 3 hours to get there if you were lucky. And then if you stayed late and you had something, you had to keep going. If you were there past 4:30, you couldn't get home till 9, 10 o'clock at night if you were lucky. I just didn't want to do that. I watched people with careers. It was a place where you get promoted, but these guys would spend a career and they didn't know their families.
Yeah.
They did not know their families. And I also had a call to church work. So I retired, and I was on terminal leave. I had time off, and I started seminary in Denver, Colorado, a Methodist seminary.
Your life is an extraordinary thing.
It's different.
You started out in Alabama and Georgia, and look at all the things you saw and did. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
But then the church work has been interesting too.
Yeah.
I've led 3 churches. That's hard work.
Yeah.
But I don't regret it. And the church here has been good. And then a lot of church people come into St. George, which was settled by the Latter-day Saints. And they're going to convert everybody. Well, I came here and says, let's work together. Came here and I bought the house we're in right now. And I said, do we need to get flood insurance? And they just laughed at me. Everybody goes, it never rains here, and it doesn't rain that much. But after a few months I was here, 100-year flood hit. And the Virgin River, which you can usually jump over, literally just jump over, was floating $500,000 houses right down within less than 2 miles from where we are right now.
I remember when that was happening.
And Valley View, you came in on Valley View. My wife was the last one across that bridge before it washed out. She watched it wash away. And I was wondering, well, how am I going to get to my church? But you could find a way. And St. George was not prepared. They had never had stuff like this. So they didn't know what to do. So I called up the Methodist Church headquarters. I came up with $10,000 possibly to use. Went to the Presbyterian minister. He came up with $10,000 to possibly use. And we called a meeting to say, how are we going to help people? We used UMCOR, which is United Methodist Committee on Relief, and they started sitting there, and they brought in FEMA. And then all of a sudden, people in town says, well, we're glad the Methodists are here. I didn't do that. It's just people needed help. We did the help. And then I've worked with some wonderful people. We did things like in Angola, people were dying from malaria. And so we had a theme in the Methodist Church called Just for Nets. Bought all kind of mosquito nets, because if you weren't bit by the mosquitoes, you didn't get malaria. Well, we bought all this stuff, but we needed to get them over to Africa. And guess what? LDS Church and Ted Turner helped get all those nets we bought to Angola, and people quit dying from malaria. We can do things together, and that's just, I love the work in the church doing that, and that has happened here in St. George. When I first got here, I went around to all the churches just meeting people. And I'd talked to a few, and then went to the Catholic Church, and the priest was busy. So I said, I'd like to do something with you. And then I left, went back to the church. That afternoon, the phone rings. He says, you said you want to do something with us. I says, sure, let's work together. He says, well, Holy Week is coming up, and we're going to have Stations of the Cross right down Diagonal Street. Would you do that? And I said, yes. And there was a hesitation. He says, well, do you think others? I says, and it sounded arrogant. I says, yes, if I ask them. I had credibility, and I was not bragging because I asked others. They said, yeah, we'll do it. So we did Stations of the Cross right down Diagonal. And here are all the churches working together. So I have enjoyed it. I have lived in so many different places. I've moved from base to base to base to base. And Methodist Church, the bishop tells you where you go. It's like you salute smartly and you go where the bishop sends you. And the bishop sent me here. And I haven't had to move since I've never lived anywhere as long as I've lived here. I've lived here 22 years now.
Well, you've obviously are a mover and a shaker, and you know how to get things done.
I try to.
And you do it with a good attitude.
And I do it with people like Tim Martin.
Yeah.
Where we trust each other, and we both wanted the best for everybody.
Yeah.
Now, he's smarter than I am, even if he is a Navy guy.
Well, I don't know. You're pretty smart, dude.
He's smarter than I am, but yeah, he went out and built nuclear power plants and everything else like that, and I commend him for that. Good for that.
Yeah.
But if he came back down here, we'd work together just like that. I owe him $2 right now, though. Every time Air Force plays Navy, Air Force Academy, there's a $2 bet. And the Air Force has won more times than Navy, so I'm ahead in the money-wise, but I still owe him $2. But you have to give it to him in front of a crowd.
Well, buddy, thanks for sharing today.
Greg, it's been
fun.
a
real pleasure.
Good.
It's very informative. That's fascinating stuff. That's such a cool plane, but it's so interesting because, like you said, its parameters are very, right? It's very narrow.
It's one of a kind.
Yeah.
And it's still being flown.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to see because it's so unusual. But anyway, thank you for everything. Thank you for sharing your time and your stories. I really appreciate it. It's a real honor.
Enjoy doing it. God's blessings.